of the large commercial truck's engine was a familiar rhythm, a hypnotic thrum Michael Hayes associated with a fragile sense of control. For years, that control had been his anchor. In the arid, dust-choked valleys of Afghanistan and the scorching heat of Iraqi deserts, his life was a series of calculated risks, of tactical decisions made in a heartbeat that meant the difference between life and death. He served as a combat engineer, a man who built bridges under fire and disarmed explosive traps. His mind a steel trap of logic and procedure. That was then. Now the enemy was invisible, insidious, and far more merciless. A rare, aggressive form of neurodegenerative disease slowly consuming his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. The nightmares were relentless. A nightly replay of the improvised explosive device that tore through his squad. The shrapnel that still embedded itself in his left shoulder. A constant ache that mirrored the one in his soul. He woke in a cold sweat. Lily's small, frail face superimposed over the faces of fallen comrades. Discipline, his bedrock for so long, became a crumbling foundation under the weight of medical bills that piled higher than the mountains he had once navigated. His insurance, a labyrinthine beast of corporate indifference, denied coverage for Lily's specialized treatment, deeming it experimental and unproven. Every single day brought a new, impossible charge. $100 for a consultation, $500 for a scan, thousands for a single dose of medication. He sold everything. His modest house in the suburbs, his battered but beloved classic pickup truck, even the old military-issue watch he wore through 2 tours of duty. His savings, once a comfortable cushion, vanished like mist in the desert sun. He was in a credit spiral, a financial black hole that sucked him deeper with each passing hour. Desperation was a cold, bitter taste in his mouth, overriding every ounce of his ingrained caution. He scanned online forums, obscure job boards, anything that promised a rapid infusion of cash, even if it reeked of danger. It was during one such desperate search, late at night, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the worry etched on his face, that his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He almost dismissed it, another scam. But a flicker of intuition compelled him to answer. "Hayes, is that you, Captain?" The voice was gruff, familiar, yet distant. Michael froze. "Stone? Alex? What the hell? Alex Stone." His former sergeant, a man built like a granite slab, with eyes that saw more than he ever let on. They had been through hell together, 2 tours of duty forging a bond that superseded friendship. A silent understanding born of shared trauma and unwavering loyalty. Alex Stone always spoke few words, and those he spoke were usually laced with a cryptic edge. After their discharge from military service, Alex Stone vanished into the wind, leaving no forwarding address, no trace. Michael often wondered what happened to him. "Been a while, Captain." Alex Stone's voice rumbled, a low growl that still held that hint of mystery. "Heard you were in a tight spot." Michael's jaw tightened. He had not publicly advertised his financial woes, but the rumor mill, especially among military veterans, was a fast and brutal thing. "That's one way to put it. I have a job for you." Alex Stone cut straight to the point as always. High-paying, trucking, deliveries to a specific location in Montana. Michael's heart gave a strange lurch. Trucking. It was not exactly combat engineering, but it was honest work. Montana? What kind of cargo? It does not matter. Alex Stone's voice hardened, losing any trace of warmth. "That is the first rule, Captain. You never look at the cargo. You never ask about it. You never ask any questions beyond what is necessary for the delivery. Strict deadlines. And you talk to the receiver strictly about the delivery paperwork. No small talk, nothing. A knot of unease formed in Michael's gut. This was not just a trucking job. The unknown company, the sealed cargo, the extreme secrecy, Alex Stone's tone. It all screamed illicit. His military instincts, honed by years of sniffing out ambushes and hidden threats, screamed danger. But then he looked at a photograph on his desk. Lily smiling weakly from her hospital bed, intravenous lines disappearing into her tiny arm. He heard the doctor's grave words about Lily's worsening condition, the ticking clock, the escalating costs. The thought of Lily, of her future, of giving her a chance, outweighed all his deep-seated apprehensions. He swallowed hard, pushing down the logical warnings, the internal alarms blaring in his mind. This was temporary. He promised himself it was. Just until he had enough. Just until Lily was out of the woods. He would collect the money, save his daughter, and then he would get out no matter what it took. He would make sure of it. "All right, Alex Stone," Michael said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I am in. What is the first pickup?" The company, referred to only as Logistics Solutions in the sparse paperwork, was as nebulous as Alex Stone's explanation. Michael received his instructions via encrypted messages, a series of coordinates and times, each one stamped with an urgency that left no room for delay. He spent a hurried day in a warehouse on the outskirts of Salt Lake City, a place with no corporate branding, no visible employees beyond a taciturn supervisor who spoke only in clipped instructions. The training was equally brief, focused solely on the operation of the massive freightliner Cascadia they assigned him. It was a powerful, nondescript large commercial truck, its engine a low growl, coupled with a massive, windowless, and utterly opaque trailer. The supervisor, a man with cold, unblinking eyes and an unnervingly bald head, emphasized the rules Alex Stone had laid out, adding a chilling rider. "Your safety, Mr. Hayes, depends entirely on your compliance." The first trip led him deep into the wild, untamed heart of Montana. The route was a patchwork of interstate highway, gradually giving way to state roads, and finally devolving into a barely discernible overgrown path that snaked through miles of dense, whispering forests. The solitude of the highway, usually a comfort for long-haul drivers, amplified his unease. He passed hours without seeing another vehicle, his only company the monotonous hum of the engine and the growing silence of the wilderness. The deeper he drove, the more isolated he felt, a tiny speck swallowed by an ocean of green. It was a primal, unsettling quiet that grated on his military veteran's nerves, a silence that felt less like peace and more like a predator holding its breath. Finally, after hours of winding through the increasingly rough terrain, the dense tree line parted, revealing his destination. It was a cluster of unremarkable, low-slung buildings, ringed by a formidable chain-link fence topped with glittering coils of razor wire. There were no lights beyond a few strategically placed floodlights, even in the approaching dusk. It was tucked away, far from any paved road, a secret whispered only to the wind. He pulled the rig up to the gate, which swung open silently, operated by an unseen hand. As he drove inside, he noticed figures emerging from one of the buildings. They were men, all of them, and all of them were absolutely bald. Their clothing was utilitarian. a uniform of dark, drab jumpsuits that blended with the deepening shadows. They moved with a synchronized, almost robotic efficiency. Their faces were devoid of emotion, their eyes dark and penetrating as they met his gaze for a fleeting moment. It was a look that offered no welcome, no curiosity, only an unsettling, silent assessment that sent an involuntary shiver down Michael's spine. He instinctively averted his eyes, remembering Alex Stone's first rule. Never look at them, never look at the cargo. The process of cargo transfer was a meticulously choreographed ritual. He backed the massive trailer into a designated bay. The bald men swarmed around the rig, silent and efficient. Michael unhitched the current trailer, the heavy coupling clanking as it detached. Another preloaded, identical, opaque container was then backed into place. The entire operation completed with practiced speed. One of the bald men, slightly taller than the rest, approached Michael's cab with a clipboard. He presented a manifest, a single sheet of paper with cryptic alphanumeric codes. Michael signed it, his hand steady despite the gnawing unease. No words were exchanged, not a single syllable. The bald man simply nodded, a curt, almost imperceptible gesture, and stepped back. Michael felt their eyes on him, a silent pressure until he had started the engine and was pulling away. The return trip always felt longer, the truck now loaded with a new, equally mysterious container. He did not clearly see the emblems Alex Stone had vaguely alluded to. He knew they were there, a subtle mark near the base of the trailer, an almost imperceptible etching in the dull metal. He tried not to think about them, tried not to dwell on the unsettling uniformity of the bald men or the chilling isolation of the compound. Each completed trip brought a substantial sum deposited instantly into his bank account. It was more money than he had ever made in such a short period. He immediately transferred the funds to Lily's ever-growing medical bills. And he saw the difference. Lily's eyes were a little brighter, her voice a fraction stronger. She was responding to the treatment, albeit slowly, thanks to the medication his insurance would not touch. That progress, that glimmer of hope, was the only justification he needed for the escalating anxiety, for the gnawing sensation that he was entangled in something profoundly sinister. He reminded himself that he was doing this for Lily, and for Lily alone. The money was a salve, but it could not fully numb the increasing dread that settled deep in his bones after each silent, unsettling encounter in the heart of the Montana wilderness. Michael completed 4 more runs along the same desolate route, each journey a precise repetition of the last. The routine, designed perhaps to instill a sense of normalcy, achieved the opposite. It amplified his apprehension, each familiar curve in the road, each silent mile, tightening the knot of unease in his stomach. The unchanging landscape, the identical procedures, the unwavering silence of his contacts. It all felt less like efficiency, and more like a carefully constructed cage. The compound itself was a fortress, a stark silhouette against the Montana sky. High chain-link fences, topped with multiple strands of concertina wire, disappeared into the dense forest, leaving no visible breaches. Watchtowers, rudimentary but effective, stood at each corner of the perimeter, equipped with surveillance cameras and powerful floodlights. The single winding dirt road he traveled was the only access point, leading through miles of untouched wilderness. Each time he arrived, the massive gate swung open just enough for his rig to pass through, then clanked shut behind him. The cargo was always taken within 100 yards of the entrance, never allowing him a glimpse inside the main perimeter. He caught tantalizing fragments of structures beyond the fences. A large, low-slung building here, a network of conduits there, but nothing concrete enough to make sense of the compound's purpose. It was a tightly controlled environment, a place designed to keep secrets in and outsiders out. His interactions with the bald men continued to disturb him. It was not just that they were all bald and wore the same drab jumpsuits. It was the eerie, almost uncanny similarity in their physical appearance. Identical build, a lean, muscular frame, the same unblinking dark eyes. Even their gait and their minimal gestures were strikingly alike. This was not merely a matter of uniform, it was a deeper biological kinship, hinting at engineered conformity. The question gnawed at him, even as he forced himself to maintain the detached professionalism Alex Stone had demanded. On one of the return trips, the unsettling feeling of not knowing what he was transporting became unbearable. After dropping off a trailer and picking up a new sealed container, he activated a small military-grade monocular from his personal kit, under the guise of checking his tire pressure. He followed their path through the thick brush, but the compound's layout, combined with the tree cover, obscured his view. The cargo always went deep inside, to a central facility, but its ultimate destination and purpose remained a mystery. He felt a constant, unseen eye on him, a subtle pressure that suggested his movements were monitored from the moment he entered the perimeter. It reinforced the idea that his route, his schedule, even his presence, was under an unspoken, pervasive control. He defaulted to his combat training: observe everything, reveal nothing. He became a master of the silent transaction, keeping his face impassive, his eyes carefully averted from the cargo and the men handling it. He signed the manifests with practiced efficiency, answered only with curt nods or precise numbers when necessary. He maintained a professional detachment that was almost pathological, a defense mechanism against the unknown. But the internal struggle never ceased. Each mile driven was a testament to his love for Lily, and each mile also deepened the sense of dread that coiled in his stomach. Sometimes when he stepped out of the cab at a rest stop hundreds of miles from the compound, stretching his legs in the quiet hours of the night, he heard something. A very faint rustle, a subtle shift of weight, an almost imperceptible thump from inside the massive sealed container behind him. It was never loud enough for easy identification, never more than a whisper of a sound carried on the wind. He quickly dismissed it, blaming the long hours, the exhaustion, the mounting paranoia that became his constant companion. "Just your mind playing tricks, Hayes," he told himself. "You are getting spooked by a box." But the whispers of sound, however faint, lingered, adding another layer to the growing unease that permeated his every waking hour. The success of the trips, measured in Lily's gradual recovery and the steady shrinking of his debt, had lulled Michael into a dangerous sense of complacency. The initial rush of dread faded into a dull hum, replaced by a cautious optimism. He even allowed himself a brief, almost reckless lapse in judgment on one of the return trips. He was miles from the turnoff onto the desolate dirt road that led to the compound, still on a relatively well-maintained state highway in the vast, open expanse of Montana. The road was empty, stretching endlessly beneath a wide-open sky. He pushed the Freightliner a little harder than usual, the speedometer needle creeping 10 miles over the posted limit. Just this once, he thought. No one is out here anyway. Then, in his rearview mirror, he saw it. The flashing blue and red lights of a patrol car. A county sheriff by its appearance. Michael sighed, a mixture of exasperation and resignation. So much for no one being out here. He pulled over, the massive truck shuddering to a halt on the shoulder of the road. He prepared himself for the inevitable lecture, the request for his license and registration, the potential for a hefty speeding ticket that would eat into Lily's medical fund. He would play the tired trucker card, perhaps a bit of the military veteran card if needed. The young sheriff, a man in his late 20s with a neatly trimmed mustache, approached the cab with a practiced gait. Michael rolled down the window, the fresh, pine-scented air rushing in. "Everything all right, officer?" Michael asked, sounding calm, professional. The officer leaned in, his gaze sweeping over Michael, then the cab. But then his eyes drifted. They drifted past Michael's shoulder, past the back of the cab, and landed squarely on the side of the massive, opaque trailer. Specifically, his gaze locked onto the subtle, almost imperceptible emblem etched into the dull metal near the bottom edge. It was small, no bigger than a man's palm, a stylized, almost heraldic design that Michael had only vaguely registered before. The change in the officer was instantaneous and terrifying. His face, ruddy from the wind, drained of all color, turning a shocking, sickly pale. His eyes, which had been alert and professional moments before, widened in naked, unadulterated horror. His breath hitched audibly. It was a look Michael had seen before, on the faces of young recruits confronted with the brutal reality of combat, a look of pure primal fear. The officer did not say a word. He did not ask for Michael's license. He did not issue a warning. He simply recoiled, as if he had been struck by an invisible electric current. He took a stumbling step back, his hand shaking visibly as he made a quick, jerky motion, waving Michael on. "Go, just go." His voice was a strained whisper, barely audible over the truck's idling engine, laced with an urgency that bordered on panic. He looked like a man who had seen a terrifying apparition, or worse. He turned sharply, practically sprinting back to his patrol car, jumped inside and roared away in the opposite direction, his lights still flashing, leaving Michael alone on the empty highway. Michael stared after the rapidly receding patrol car, utterly bewildered. What in God's name was that emblem? What power did it wield over law enforcement? It was not just a symbol. It was a brand, a mark of something so profoundly terrifying that it made a hardened officer abandon his duty in a flash of pure terror. The incident only intensified his suspicions, confirming that the scope of his involvement was far greater and more perilous than he had imagined. But the money continued to flow, direct deposits that hit his account with clockwork precision. Lily was getting better. And for a man drowning in debt, the allure of solvency, of saving his daughter, was a powerful opiate, dulling the sharp edges of his burgeoning fear. He rationalized it, as he had everything else. It is not my problem. My job is to drive. And as long as they pay, and Lily gets better, I do not need to know. The financial relief was palpable. The money from these mysterious runs not only covered Lily's soaring medical costs, but also allowed him to chip away at the mountain of old credit card debt that had suffocated him for months. Life, it seemed, was finally stabilizing, the financial noose around his neck loosening its grip. Yet, the bizarre encounter with the sheriff left a chilling residue in Michael's mind, a constant, nagging reminder that beneath the calm surface of his newfound prosperity lay an unseen abyss, hinting at the true, terrifying scale of the secret he had unwittingly become a part of. Despite the steady stream of money and the encouraging reports about Lily's progress, a deep-seated unease festered within Michael. His military training, a lifetime of instinct refined by combat, screamed at him. This idyllic situation, with its inexplicable secrecy and high rewards, was inherently unstable. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that such equilibrium could not last. There were too many variables, too many unanswered questions. The communication protocol continued to gnaw at him. He never had direct contact with a dispatcher or anyone else from Logistics Solutions. All his instructions, all his queries, passed through Alex Stone. Alex Stone was always reachable, always prompt in his replies, but his answers were invariably terse, devoid of any superfluous detail. It was another unsettling anomaly for an operation that clearly involved valuable cargo and significant logistical coordination. Why the black box? Why the absolute reliance on a single, cryptic intermediary? In response to this growing premonition of disaster, Michael began to carry his go-bag with him everywhere. He kept it in the sleeper berth of his truck, a worn but meticulously organized duffel. Inside, he kept a sturdy military-grade plate carrier with ceramic inserts, offering serious protection against small arms fire. Next to it, a reliable handgun he had carried in Afghanistan, along with several loaded magazines. Tucked into separate pouches were flashbang grenades, their concussive force capable of disorienting an opponent, and a pair of night vision goggles that boasted thermal imaging capabilities. A compact, sealed trauma kit, fully stocked with tourniquets, hemostatic dressings, and pain medication, rounded out the essentials. He called it his trouble bag, a grim joke to himself, but the reality was far from humorous. He prepared for a fight he did not understand, against an enemy he could not name. Alex Stone, ever observant, noticed the bulk of the duffel bag during one of Michael's rare calls. "Still carrying your security blanket, Captain?" He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Seems a bit much. This is not Kandahar." Michael just grunted in response. He knew Alex Stone was right in one sense. It was not a war zone, he recognized. But for a job this strange, with so many unspoken rules and unknown dangers, there was no such thing as too much. His instincts, honed by years of combat survival, told him that whatever awaited him at the end of this road, it was far more insidious than a roadside bomb. His paranoia escalated, manifesting in small, compulsive habits. During every rest stop, he meticulously inspected his truck, searching for any signs of listening devices or tracking beacons. He ran his hand over the dashboard, under the seats, along the trailer's frame, his fingers tracing every seam and crevice. He felt like a pawn in a vast, unseen game, the rules of which were utterly unknown to him. Every rustle of leaves in the forest bordering the highway, every distant animal cry, every unseen shadow in his peripheral vision made him tense, his hand instinctively hovering near the pistol grip tucked into his bag. He was always on alert, always waiting for the inevitable other shoe to drop. The last normal cargo arrived on a Tuesday, under a bruised, lowering sky. The container felt heavier than usual when it was loaded, the truck's suspension dipping noticeably. As he pulled away from the compound, the air around the trailer crackled with an unusual energy, a faint hum that resonated in his chest. Then he noticed it, a faint but distinct smell. It was not a rotten smell or a chemical one. It was something wild, primal, mixed with a metallic tang that made him think of blood. It was the scent of raw animal power, an unsettling musk that emanated directly from the sealed steel box behind him. The sensation sent a ripple of primal fear through him, a shiver that went beyond mere cold. He dismissed it, as he had dismissed the faint sounds, the strange emblem, the identical men. Just fatigue, Hayes. Your imagination working overtime. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on the endless ribbon of highway, trying to outrun the growing sense of dread. The engine died with an abrupt, chilling silence. Not a sputter, not a cough, just an immediate, absolute cessation of sound. Michael's foot, still on the accelerator, pressed against nothing. The massive freight liner, which moments before had been rumbling with the power of 1,000 horses, now coasted to a halt in the absolute middle of nowhere. He was deep in the heart of the Montana wilderness, miles from any town, any visible structure, any other vehicle. The nearest radio tower was a distant memory, and his phone's signal bars had long since vanished. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the pines and the frantic thumping of his own heart. He was utterly alone, adrift in a sea of trees. "Come on, you piece of junk," Michael muttered, twisting the ignition key again. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered, then died. Not even a dim glow. Total electrical failure. He tried the radio, flicking switches, turning dials. Silence. He pulled out his satellite phone, a secure military-grade model he always kept charged. No signal. He was completely cut off, isolated from the world he knew, stranded with a mysterious, unsettling cargo. His first thought was Alex Stone. He would report the breakdown, and the company, surely valuing its secretive cargo, would send a recovery team. They would have backup rigs, technicians, a protocol for this. He waited. He waited for hours, watching the shadows lengthen, the forest morphing into an impenetrable wall of black. He waited through the night, huddled in the cab, the cold seeping into his bones. He waited through the entire next day, scanning the empty road, listening for the distant hum of an approaching vehicle. And then he waited through a second night, the moon a sliver above the silent trees. No one came. The realization settled over him like a shroud of ice. They were not coming. His calculation that the company would prioritize its cargo over his personal safety was correct, but their definition of recovery clearly did not involve him. He was expendable. The feeling of abandonment was a physical blow, a betrayal that stung with the cold precision of a sniper's bullet. The sound started on the second night, subtle at first, then growing steadily. From inside the massive, opaque container, low, rhythmic thumps, like something heavy striking against the metal walls, muffled but distinct. Michael pressed his ear against the bulkhead of the cab, listening intently. The thumps grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by a faint grating scrape. Then a new sound emerged, one that made the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. A low, guttural growl, deep and primal, vibrating through the very frame of the truck. It was not human. As the hours dragged on, the sounds intensified, the rhythmic thumps giving way to more violent, desperate impacts. The growling escalated into a series of snarls and enraged roars that reverberated through the trailer. Michael pressed his face against the window, staring into the impenetrable darkness, his breath fogging the glass. He heard the distinct sound of more than one creature. Not just one beast, but several. Their movements became more coordinated, the impacts against the metal walls more powerful, the roars angrier, more insistent. The container was a prison, and its occupants were fighting with a desperate, terrifying strength to break free. A chilling dilemma presented itself. His army training had drilled into him the concept of mission integrity, of protecting vital assets. But his primary directive, above all else, was survival. He considered abandoning the truck, cutting his losses, and simply walking away into the vast wilderness. He had his trouble bag, enough supplies for a few days, and the skills to navigate the rough terrain. But the thought was immediately countered by a cold, hard truth he had learned in combat. Powerful, shadowy organizations did not take kindly to asset loss. These people, whoever they were clearly dangerous. Abandoning their cargo would not only mean the loss of his job and Lily's treatment, but would undoubtedly unleash their wrath, a wrath that could very well be far more terrible than hunger or thirst in the woods. His instinct for self-preservation battled with the desperate need to protect his family. He was trapped. 3 days. 3 agonizing days had passed since the truck had died. Michael had rationed the food bars and water from his trouble bag, but the psychological strain became unbearable. He meticulously checked every system in the Freightliner battery, starter, fuel lines, but found no apparent cause for the complete electrical shutdown. The truck was simply dead. This inexplicable failure, occurring in such an isolated location, only intensified his suspicion of sabotage. Someone had cut him off, left him stranded, a pawn in a game he did not understand. The sounds from the container were no longer just sounds. They were a siege. The rhythmic thumps had morphed into the sustained, violent impacts of massive force against stressed metal. The air was filled with the terrible shriek of groaning, bending steel, the metallic screech of claws scraping against the inner walls, the gnashing clatter of teeth attempting to chew through the reinforced panels. The creatures inside were no longer merely struggling. They purposefully, systematically, and ferociously attempted to tear their way out. The container walls visibly bulged and vibrated with the force of the blows. Michael, his face drawn and grim, ran a hand over the cold steel of the cab's rear wall, feeling the vibrations directly. His military experience, his understanding of human endurance, told him something chillingly obvious. No human being, no matter how strong or desperate, could survive in a sealed container without food or water for 3 days, let alone inflict such catastrophic damage to industrial-grade steel. The implications were stark, undeniable. Whatever was in that container, it was not human, and it was clearly not contained for much longer. He faced a deadly, non-human threat, and it was now abundantly clear that help was not coming. He was utterly alone. The decision was a heavy one, yet strangely liberating in its finality. Instead of waiting for the inevitable, for whatever monstrous thing was about to erupt from the trailer, he would take the initiative. He would arm himself, activate his night vision gear, and attempt to escape into the dense forest. His survival instinct, honed in the brutal crucible of combat, asserted itself, overriding the paralyzing fear. He would not just sit there and become prey. With practiced efficiency, he pulled on his plate carrier, the familiar weight a grim comfort. He checked the action on his handgun, chambering a round with a quiet click. He tucked 2 flashbangs and a combat knife into accessible pouches. His hands, though trembling slightly, moved with the precision of long ingrained habit. He took a deep breath, the cold night air filling his lungs, steeling himself for the terrifying sprint into the unknown. Just as he reached for the cab door handle, a deafening shriek of tearing metal ripped through the night. The sound was agonizing, like a beast's dying roar rendered in steel. Michael froze, his eyes snapping to the back of the truck. One of the container's reinforced walls near the top buckled inward with a groan, then popped outwards with explosive force. A jagged, ragged tear, nearly 3 feet long, appeared in the metal. And through it, for a fleeting, terrifying second, Michael saw it. A shadow. A hulking, powerful form, impossibly large, moving with fluid, animalistic speed within the confines of the breaching container. Details remained obscured, but the sheer size and raw power of the silhouette was enough. That was all the confirmation he needed. Michael did not hesitate. Gripping his pistol, he shoved open the cab door, hit the ground running, and plunged headlong into the dense, suffocating blackness of the forest. He ran blindly, crashing through undergrowth, scrambling over fallen logs, his only goal to put as much distance as possible between himself and the truck, between himself and the horror that was about to erupt from its metal confines. Michael ran until his lungs burned and his legs screamed, the adrenaline-fueled terror pushing him far beyond his usual endurance. Finally, gasping for breath, he collapsed behind a cluster of thick old-growth pines, their massive trunks offering a modicum of concealment. He quickly pulled out his night vision goggles, adjusting the strap over his head, then flipping them down over his eyes. The world shifted into an eerie green monochrome, amplifying faint light sources and revealing the heat signatures of anything alive. His hands, though trembling, moved with military precision as he activated the thermal overlay. He pressed himself against the rough bark of the tree, his heart hammering against his ribs, watching the silent, terrifying scene unfold back at the truck. The container did not just break open, it exploded. With another ear-splitting shriek of tortured metal, the torn section of the wall peeled back like a monstrous flower petal. From the gaping maw of the ruptured trailer, 3 enormous hulking figures emerged. Michael's breath hitched, a choked sound caught in his throat. They were truly monstrous. Easily over 7 feet tall, rippling with corded muscle, their forms vaguely humanoid but undeniably bestial. They stood on powerful hind legs, their movements impossibly quick and fluid, a terrifying blend of human dexterity and animalistic grace. Their silhouettes were unmistakably lupine, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, long, powerful limbs, heads that seemed too large for their bodies, hinting at massive jaws. As they moved under the faint moonlight, visible as brighter spots through his night vision, Michael clearly saw their terrifying essence. Massive, razor-sharp claws extended from their hands, glinting even in the dimness. Their mouths, when they occasionally opened in what appeared as frustrated snarls, revealed rows of long predatory teeth, bone white against the dark, And their eyes. Those were the worst. They glowed with an unnerving, predatory intensity, twin points of emerald fire in the darkness, sweeping across the forest, searching. These were not men. These were not animals he knew. These were apex predators, perfectly evolved for the hunt. The creatures seemed disoriented at first, sniffing the air, their heads swiveling from side to side. They moved around the ruptured container, assessing the damage, their low growls rumbling in the night. Then, one of them, the largest and most powerfully built, suddenly froze. Its head snapped up, nostrils flaring, twitching, testing the air. It turned, its glowing eyes sweeping precisely in Michael's general direction. Michael instinctively pressed himself further into the shadow of the pine, holding his breath, his every muscle tensed. He chose his hiding spot with decades of combat experience guiding him, directly upwind from the truck. This instinct, a primal understanding of how scent travels, proved to be his salvation. The creature, though it clearly sensed a disturbance, a lingering human presence, could not pinpoint his exact location due to the wind carrying his scent away. It let out a frustrated, guttural snarl, pawing at the ground. The three beasts then communicated, not with words, but with a series of low growls, shifts of their heads, and subtle gestures that spoke of an innate understanding. Then, with chilling coordination, they split. Two of the creatures loped off into the dense forest to Michael's left, moving with an unnerving, silent speed. The third, the largest one, peeled off to his right, disappearing into the darkness in a different direction. Michael watched them go, a cold dread settling over him. They were not simply wandering. They were implementing a strategy. They had begun a systematic hunt, and he was the prey. It was going to be a long, nightmarish game of cat and mouse, and the odds were stacked impossibly against him. The night dissolved into a brutal, horrifying game of cat and mouse. Michael used every trick, every ounce of combat experience he had acquired over 2 decades in the military. He moved with the quiet stealth of an unseen figure, pressing himself low to the ground, using the dense undergrowth and the broken terrain of the Montana forest as his allies. He doubled back, made false trails, used fallen logs as temporary screens, and ducked behind ancient trees. His breath hitched in his throat. Every rustle of leaves in the forest bordering the highway, every snapping twig, every distant hoot of an owl seemed to be the approach of a predator. He was hyper-aware, his senses stretched to their breaking point, convinced he heard their low growls, their guttural barks, the heavy thud of their paws moving through the undergrowth, seemingly from all directions at once. He tried to throw them off his scent and their coordinated pursuit. He left a small item from his kit, a discarded empty water bottle, a piece of gauze from his trauma kit, hoping to draw their attention in a different direction for a precious few seconds. He broke into short, explosive sprints, then abruptly dropped, melting into the shadows, his eyes scanning the green-tinted world through his night vision goggles, searching for the telltale heat signatures of his pursuers. Several times the encounters were terrifyingly close. He scrambled up a rocky incline or navigated a dense patch of thorny bushes and glimpsed a hulking silhouette, a flash of glowing emerald eyes no more than 20 yards away. Each time his heart leaped into his throat, a surge of pure terror electrifying his nerves. He dropped immediately, his rifle automatically coming up, but then, The creature vanished, dissolving into the deeper shadows as silently as it appeared, only to reappear moments later in another direction, drawing him deeper into their labyrinthine hunt. It became chillingly clear that these were not mere animals. Their movements, their apparent communication, their systematic tracking, it all spoke of intelligence, of a calculated, predatory mind. They did not simply chase, they herded, they flanked, they anticipated. They hunted him with a tactical precision that mirrored his own. This was the chilling truth. They were werewolves. The word no longer felt absurd. The evidence of his own eyes and ears was overwhelming. Their bipedal stance, their lupine features, their incredible speed and strength, their pack mentality, it all fit. The physical and mental exhaustion accumulated with every desperate step. His muscles screamed in protest, each movement a Herculean effort. A deep gash on his forearm, sustained when he fell scrambling over a jagged rock, burned with a dull throb. His tactical instincts, usually sharp as a razor, were dulled by fatigue and the constant, soul-crushing fear. He knew, with a grim certainty, that this desperate game could not continue indefinitely. Sooner or later he would slip, he would falter, and they would catch him. And when they did, he knew with a bone-deep certainty that his nightmares would become reality. The inevitable came with the first faint hint of pre-dawn light filtering through the dense canopy. After hours of relentless pursuit, Michael, weakened by exhaustion and a growing fear, misjudged a maneuver. As he tried to double back through a dense thicket, a massive furred form burst from the trees, cutting off his escape. He had no time to react, to maneuver for a better tactical position. He was cornered, just as his exhaustion had warned him he would be. One of the werewolves, the largest one, stood before him, its glowing eyes fixed on him, its massive chest heaving with exertion, a low, guttural growl rumbling deep in its throat. Despite the surge of terror, Michael's combat instinct, honed by years of life or death situations, immediately took over. There was no room for panic, only for action. He pulled a flashbang grenade from his vest with a practiced movement, yanked the pin, and tossed it low, directly at the creature's feet. A deafening report ripped through the quiet forest, accompanied by a blinding flash of light. The werewolf recoiled with a pained snarl, momentarily disoriented, its glowing eyes squeezing shut. That was his opening. Michael did not hesitate. He brought his handgun up, sighting down the barrel, and emptied the first magazine into the beast. He targeted the most vulnerable points on any large bipedal target: the eyes, the joints, the chest, the exposed flesh of the muzzle. The pistol rounds struck with sharp impacts, eliciting enraged roars from the creature. The werewolf, momentarily stunned but not stopped, recovered with astonishing speed. It roared, a sound of pure, unbridled fury, and launched itself at Michael. Its massive claws, sharp as razor blades, swiped through the air, aiming for his head and chest. Michael ducked, rolled and parried, relying on his plate carrier to absorb the brunt of the blows. He felt the jarring impacts, the sharp, tearing sensation of claws finding gaps in his armor, ripping through his uniform, drawing hot lines of blood across his unprotected skin. A searing pain blossomed in his left side as one of the creature's raking swipes tore deeply into his flesh, sending him stumbling back. He knew bullets alone would not be enough. The beast was too powerful, too resilient. He dropped the empty pistol, pulling his combat knife from its sheath in one fluid motion. The 9-inch blade gleamed dully in the pre-dawn light. He kept moving, dodging, using the last reserves of his strength to stay out of the creature's reach, trying to create distance while simultaneously looking for an opening. He fired another magazine, hitting the creature again and again, slowing its attacks, buying himself precious seconds. He was bleeding, his vision blurring from pain and exhaustion, but the instinct to survive was a burning fire in his gut. In a desperate final surge of adrenaline, as the werewolf reared up, its claws poised for a killing blow directly to his heart, Michael found his moment. He feigned a dodge to the left, drawing the creature's lunge, then pivoted sharply to the right. With a guttural cry, he lunged forward, not at the chest, but for the exposed, vulnerable side of the werewolf's neck. His knife, propelled by the last remnants of his strength, sunk deep into the flesh, severing arteries and veins. The beast let out a horrific gurgling shriek, a sound of agony and rage combined. Its massive body convulsed, its powerful limbs thrashing, wildly tearing at the air. It stumbled backward, its glowing eyes losing their focus, its movements slowing, becoming erratic. It crashed to the forest floor with a tremendous thud, its breath coming in ragged, rattling gasps. Michael, wounded, bleeding, and utterly spent, scrambled away, his body screaming in protest, watching the wounded monster writhe in its death throes, its powerful form slowly, inevitably, succumbing to the wound. He had survived, for now. The first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky in bruised purples and grays, casting an ethereal, almost mournful light over the gruesome scene. Michael, slumped against a moss-covered boulder, his body screaming in protest from numerous deep lacerations and the bone-deep exhaustion, watched the dying werewolf. Its massive furred body convulsed less violently now, but the guttural growls had devolved into wet, choked gasps. A dark pool of blood, thick and viscous, spread slowly from the gaping wound in its neck, soaking into the forest floor. Its powerful limbs twitched erratically, no longer controlled by the magnificent predatory intelligence that had hunted him through the night. Then, as the first golden rays of the rising sun pierced through the dense canopy of ancient pines, dappling the forest floor with streaks of light, they touched the dying creature. What happened next was a horror that transcended anything Michael had ever imagined, far beyond the battlefield nightmares or the monsters of folklore. To his utter, uncomprehending terror, the werewolf's body began to change. Not subtly, not slowly, but with a horrifying, agonizing rapidity. The coarse dark fur, matted with blood, receded and vanished, melting away from its powerful frame. The enormous corded muscles of its chest and limbs began to shrink, contracting and reforming. The impossibly long, clawed fingers and toes visibly shortened, the sharp talons retracting. Its snout, previously elongated and bestial, drew back, the massive jaws and predatory teeth reshaping. Its skull, once lupine and fierce, morphed, the bone structure shifting and shrinking, forcing itself into a more rounded, more familiar shape. The sounds it emitted were no longer growls, but choked, whimpering cries, a tortured agony that was profoundly, sickeningly human. The transformation was not graceful. It was a brutal, contorting metamorphosis. Every sinew, every bone, every inch of flesh twisted and reformed. Michael watched, mesmerized and horrified, unable to tear his gaze away. The creature's form became smaller, less imposing, the beast dissolving into something else entirely. When the transformation was complete, when the last of the fur had vanished and the distorted features had settled, it was no longer a werewolf that lay on the forest floor. It was a young man. He was absolutely naked, his body pale and covered in sweat, his skin unmarked by any fur, his features smooth and almost boyish. And like the men at the compound, he was completely bald, his scalp shining faintly in the nascent sunlight. He was no more than 20 years old, a mere youth. His face, still contorted in a final rictus of pain, bore a chilling, undeniable resemblance to the bald men Michael had encountered at the delivery compound. The young man took one last shuddering breath, a ragged gasp that tore through the silence of the woods. His chest spasmed once, then fell still. His eyes, which moments ago had glowed with savage, predatory fire, were now wide, empty, and fixed on the awakening sky. He was dead. Michael trembling uncontrollably, not just from the cold and his wounds, but from the profound shock that permeated his very being, finally understood. The pieces of the terrifying puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying, undeniable clarity. The sealed containers, the cargo, the bald men, the hidden compound, the powerful emblem, Alex Stone, werewolves. They were all werewolves. He had not just fought a monster. He had killed a human who was also a beast. He had stumbled upon, and irrevocably broken, their most meticulously guarded secret. There was no going back. His life, and everything he thought he knew, had just changed forever. Wounded, bloodied, and utterly hollowed out, Michael stumbled through the dim, awakening forest. His body ached with every step, his head throbbed, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the profound, chilling shock that had settled deep in his bones. The horrifying image of the transforming werewolf, the young man's final empty gaze replayed in an endless loop in his mind. Werewolves. All of them. His thoughts were a frantic, desperate cacophony. What now? What in God's name would happen now? He had broken their code, killed one of their own. He decided, wounded, to return to the vehicle, and hobbling, he reached the road where he was intercepted. He pushed through the last line of trees and emerged into the small clearing where his truck lay, a mangled, silent monument to the night's terror. Several figures were already there. They were the bald men, their drab jumpsuits blending with the pre-dawn shadows, moving with their unsettling, almost robotic efficiency around the wrecked container. But they were not alone. Closer to the group, held tightly on thick chains by two of the bald men, were two other figures. They were naked, disoriented, and terrified. Their bodies were still in a partial state of transformation, caught between human and beast. Hints of coarse fur clung to their skin. Their limbs were disproportionately long, and their faces held a haunting animalistic cast. Their eyes, wide with fear, flickered with an intelligence that was both human and wild. They were clearly the other two who had pursued him, captured and brought back, their monstrous forms slowly receding with the approach of dawn, unable to complete their shift due to the means their handlers used to control them. Michael felt a cold knot in his stomach. The true nature of the cargo was now sickeningly clear. They were transporting their own kind. Then, among the bald men, Michael saw him. A figure standing slightly apart, his stance familiar, his shoulders broad. Alex Stone. He was bald, just like the rest of them, and dressed in the same uniform-like jumpsuit. His face, usually gruff, was now impassive, his eyes holding the same unsettling, emotionless depth as the others. Michael felt a wave of icy dread wash over him, colder than any Montana winter. His friend, his brother in arms, the man who had pulled him into this nightmare, was one of them. A shapeshifter, a werewolf. The realization was a devastating blow, a betrayal that cut deeper than any wound. Alex Stone, sensing Michael's gaze, slowly turned. His eyes, devoid of any surprise or anger, swept over Michael's bloodied, wounded form, lingering for a moment on the deep lacerations on his arm and side. His gaze was analytical, assessing, clinical. He took a slow, deliberate step towards Michael, the forest silence heavy with unspoken words. What about the third one? Alex Stone's voice was low, devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the easy camaraderie they once shared. It was not a question of concern for Michael, but of accountability for the lost asset. Michael, his throat raw, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and the lingering terror, swallowed hard. He looked Alex Stone dead in the eye, knowing that denial was pointless, that the truth was already apparent. "I killed him," he croaked, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I was saving my life." He braced himself for the immediate retribution, for the swift, brutal punishment that surely awaited him for violating their most profound secret and slaying one of their own. He waited for the attack, for the death blow, for anything. In response to Michael's stark confession, Alex Stone's lips quirked, and he let out a short, dry laugh. It was not a laugh of amusement, but of a strange, clinical satisfaction. It was the sound of a man who had confirmed a hypothesis, who had seen his precise calculations bear unexpected fruit. "Captain, you truly are exceptional," Alex Stone said, his voice quiet, but with an undercurrent of something disturbingly like pride. His eyes, fixed on Michael's bloodied form, gleamed with an unsettling light. To kill a young wildling alone with standard combat arms? "I did not misjudge you, Captain. Not at all." The words, intended as praise, carried a chilling detachment. There was no sympathy for the creature Michael had killed, only an assessment of Michael's combat effectiveness. It twisted Michael's gut. This was not the Alex Stone he had known. Alex Stone then turned and walked a few paces away, joining the other bald men who had gathered in a tight circle. Michael now understood their hierarchy. These were the leaders, the elders of the pack. They spoke amongst themselves, their voices low and guttural, like a pack of wolves arguing over a fresh kill. He did not distinguish their words, but their body language was stark. Animated gestures, tense shoulders, sharp glances directed his way. He felt the raw tension, the simmering anger that emanated from their huddle. He was a trespasser, a killer of their kind, a threat to their carefully guarded secret. Michael stood, his body screaming from his wounds, his mind racing with possibilities, all of them terrifying. They would exact immediate revenge for violating their sacred secret and killing one of their own. He would be subjected to some monstrous, agonizing fate. He felt utterly exposed, completely at their mercy. He was a sheep surrounded by wolves, and his pistol, his knife, his training. None of it mattered against their collective power and their alien rules. After what felt like an eternity, the heated discussion subsided. The pack leaders fell silent, their gazes unified, all fixed on Alex Stone. Alex Stone nodded, a curt, imperceptible gesture, then turned and walked back towards Michael, his face once again an impassive mask. The weight of his impending judgment pressed down on Michael, heavier than any physical burden. "The law of blood is clear," Alex Stone began, his voice flat, devoid of the strange admiration from moments before. "The taking of a kin's life without due cause, without the ritual of challenge, is punishable by death. For you and for your family." Michael flinched, his heart seizing in his chest. Lily. His wife. He knew it, of course, but hearing it articulated, knowing their reach, sent a fresh wave of terror through him. "However," Alex Stone continued, and Michael held his breath, "the circumstances have been considered. The location of the breakdown, remote and inaccessible, the slowness of the pack in securing the asset, your forced confrontation with a wild youngling. These factors are noted. The elders decided to show mercy and understanding." The word mercy tasted like bile in Michael's mouth, coming from a creature that spoke of a young man's agonizing death with such cold calculation. Alex Stone's words hung in the chilling morning air, a sentence that was both a reprieve and a damnation. "You will not leave this work, Captain," Alex Stone stated, his voice devoid of any pretense of warmth. "Not now. You are too valuable a resource. Our kin, our pack, we cannot operate in the light of day. We shift, as you have seen, with the setting of the sun. The human world is yours during those hours. You will continue to run our routes to deliver our cargo." Michael's mind reeled. He was to be their perpetual courier, a slave to their secret society, bound to them indefinitely. The implication was horrifying. He was irreplaceable, at least for now, because he was human and could move freely during the day. He saw the cold, efficient logic in it, a perverse system that exploited his humanity for their own ends. "But that is not all," Alex Stone continued, his gaze unwavering. "You have violated the deepest of our secrets. You have seen what you were not meant to see. You have tasted the blood of a kin. There is only one path for those who bear such knowledge, such contact. When a replacement is found, when we have trained another human to serve our purpose, your human life will end. You will become one of us." Michael felt a cold, crushing weight descend upon him. Becoming one of them. A werewolf. Leaving his family forever, abandoning Lily to her illness, to a life without her father, to a fate worse than death. The terror was absolute. He stared at Alex Stone, his mind desperately searching for an escape, a loophole, any crack in their unyielding logic. "Refuse," Alex Stone said, his voice hardening, "and you will die. And your family will die. Slowly, painfully. You know our reach, Captain. You know what we are capable of. No one will save you. No one will find them. Our influence stretches further than you can imagine." The threat was clear, unequivocal. Michael's stomach lurched. He thought of Lily, her fragile smile, her innocent trust. He thought of his wife, the sacrifices she had made, the hope in her eyes. He was trapped, utterly and completely. Their power was absolute, their retribution inevitable. He had no leverage, no bargaining chips, no way out. Alex Stone stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial tone. "Look, Michael, I brought you into this. I take responsibility for that. This is the only way I can help you now, by allowing you to live, to pass on with dignity into your new existence. And more importantly, by protecting your family from the pack's direct wrath." The words were a twisted form of solace, a chilling justification for an unspeakable act of betrayal. Alex Stone, the man he had trusted with his life, was now complicit in destroying it. Michael closed his eyes, a deep, shuddering breath escaping his lips. There was no choice. His love for Lily, his fierce protective instinct for his wife, overshadowed every ounce of self-preservation. He would not condemn them. He would not leave them to the mercy of these creatures. His own fate, however horrific, was a small price to pay for their safety. He opened his eyes, meeting Alex Stone's cold gaze. "All right," Michael said, his voice flat, broken. "I understand." He was a trucker, a combat engineer, a father. But now he was something else, something terrifying and irrevocably bound. Michael Hayes, the former military man, now the driver for a pack of werewolves. He knew with a horrifying certainty what the cargo was. It was not meat, as he had once fleetingly wondered. It was their future, their young. And now, inevitably, it was his future too.